Hey everybody, Robin from Backscatter here.
Jim from Backscatter here.
We're here in our new self-isolated, germ-proof studio. And today we're talking about the zen of underwater strobe placement. So Jim, you've taught a lot of people how to take pictures underwater.
I've taught thousands of people how to shoot underwater.
And what would you say the number one question that people ask you is?
Number one question is, where do I put my strobes?
So what do you answer? What do you tell them?
I say, what do you want to light?
Okay.
And so aim the strobes at the thing you want to light is the most simple answer. If you don't know what you want to light, you'll never know where to put your strobes.
The good news is too, that in order to kind of help figure out where you want to put your strobes, there are a couple of fundamental truths that will always help you answer that question.
Knowing where to put your strobes requires knowing what you want to light. Knowing what to light means knowing what you want to have as a foreground subject. Knowing what you want to have as a foreground subject means knowing what you want your composition to be.
So that brings us to composition.
Yeah, and composition is not just about cutting off Uncle Joe's head as he blows out candles on a birthday cake.
So what is composition really about?
Well, it's about where the subject are placed in the frame, how they're lit, and also where the focus point is set. So basically everything is composition. But for this video, we're going to concentrate on the strobe aspect of it and the placement of the strobes.
So when it comes to composition, what would you say really makes a good photo?
What makes a good photo for a good composition is one that tells a story. So for example, take this snake eel image. So this is an example of good composition and something that tells a story. Everything in this frame was a very conscious decision on how I placed it, how I lit it, and where my focus point was set. So when you look at it, the snake eel is lit by my snooted strobe in the foreground, and that's where the focus point is. The diver is out of focus and in the background, shining a light on the snake eel and is a secondary subject in this frame. So the interaction between the snake eel and the diver tells the story of kind of like a diver finding a snake eel and shining his light on it. So this was a very planned shot that I did with the dive guide from Lembe Resort, Agus. Thank you for that. So this is what makes a good photo.
So now that we understand a little bit about composition, let's talk about some of the general guidelines and rules for getting good results when lighting with strobes.
Yes, so there's going to be some general rules to follow, but of course rules are meant to be broken, but only if you know what the rules are in the first place so that you can then break them.
So our first rule is use your strobes to light your foreground subject.
Yeah, it sounds obvious, but you can't light the entire ocean with your strobes. So what you want to do is you want to use strobes to highlight and draw interest to your foreground subject. You want to make it stand out from its surroundings. And picking a foreground subject is the first decision to make before you start positioning your strobes.
The second rule is get close to the subject that you want to light.
Yes, if you remember from your basic scuba class, the water filters out light quite effectively in the order of the rainbow, Roy G. Biv.
Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet.
And that's why you can't use a long lens or be very far away from a subject underwater.
Things just fall apart, right? There's not enough color, contrast, or clarity when you got to shoot through that much water.
Correct, and that's why I tend to use a fisheye lens for underwater, especially for wide-angle photography, because that way I can get really close to the subjects. I will usually be about maximum 3 feet away, but most of the shots that you're going to see from me here today are shot between 6 inches and 2 feet.
The third rule we follow is keep your strobes pulled back behind the handles of your rig.
Yes, because when we're using fisheye lens, it's an extreme wide-angle field of view, and if they're too far forward, the strobes are going to show up in the image.
The fourth rule that we have is keep those strobes up.
Natural light comes from above because that's where the sun is, and the sun is natural. It is unnatural for light to come from below, which is why if I take a dive light and I put it underneath my chin and tell a spooky story, Robin will get scared. And so you want to avoid those ghoulish kind of looks and save those for the campfire story time.
The same thing holds true if you're trying to light up a fish face or even a big reef scene.
Yeah, so if you want to avoid spooky bad photos, keep those strobes above the center line of the lens.
What about if you're shooting vertical and you got strobes out at either end?
Well, when you turn to vertical, make sure you take the one that's on the bottom and move it to be up above the center line of the lens.
Our fifth rule is use 2 arms and 3 clamps on each side of your rig.
Yes, so I like this setup myself because it mimics my own arm. I have an arm, and 1, 2, 3 joints. Here I have an arm, and 1, 2, 3 joints. I can take my arm and position it any which way I want. I can do the same thing with the strobe arms. Now, I like double 8-inch arms because they're great for both macro and wide angle. I can get them in super tight for the macro stuff. I can get them out really wide for wide angle. Plus, it also allows me to have a platform to put on some flotation to make my rig completely neutral underwater.
The sixth rule is the further you are away from your subject, the further out your strobes need to be.
So for wider scenes, you need to have the strobes out really wide to cover all that area. For scenes where you're in a lot tighter, you need to bring the strobes in tighter because if they were just out wide, they're going to completely miss the subject.
Our final rule is just a quick note about backscatter. That's the blobs in your images, not our store.
Yes, backscatter is created by a strobe lighting particulate matter that is lit up by the strobe firing in the same direction as the lens. This directly lights up the particulate matter in front of the lens and causes those out of focus white blobs.
So what are a couple of techniques we could use to maybe minimize that backscatter?
Well, let's take a look at some examples. If the strobe is repositioned so that it is not lighting in the same direction as the lens will be looking at a shadow and not the lit part of the particulate matter. This will reduce the appearance of backscatter in the photo. A second method for reducing backscatter in an image is not light it in the first place. This can be done by not lighting all the water in front of the lens by just using the edge of the strobe to light the subject. This will leave a dark area in the water immediately in front of the lens and avoid lighting all of the scatter. This typically works well for larger scenes.
So we just covered a whole lot of rules and guidelines about what we can do with our strobes, but Jim, just tell us, where the heck do we put these things?
Well, Robin, it goes back to composition. You must know what you want to light in order to know where to put your strobes. So we're not going to be leaving these in the standard 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock position or the car headlight position. We're going to need to move these strobes so that they actually light the thing we want to light, which brings us to composition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down some photos. I'm going to go over the strobe positions that I used for these photos. And I've also come up with some names for them so you can remember them for certain shooting situations.
The first strobe position is the anglerfish.
The anglerfish, great for macro shots. This is what I use when I do one strobe right over the top for macro. This resembles an anglerfish dangling a lure out in front, is why I called it the anglerfish. And so if your subject moves further away, just push it out a little bit further in front of the housing. If your subject gets closer to the front port, just move it a little bit closer. This way you get some good light on the subject. This is a great beginner position for macro, and it'll allow you to get some shots nailed down before getting a little bit more creative, a little bit more advanced with your strobe positioning.
Our second strobe position is the Frankenstein.
So this is for when subjects are further away than ideally you would want to be for your macro lens. You put your arms straight out in front as far as possible, getting the strobes closer to the subject, which will result in less water to shoot through. This will increase the contrast and clarity of the image and will also help create a shadow underneath of your subject to pop it off the bottom.
Our third position is the ape hanger.
This is my easy rider go-to position when I'm shooting wide-angle subjects in the sand. You want to get strobes as far away as possible from the sand and aim straight down. This way it hits the subject first and the sand second. This is just enough distance to prevent a blowout of the sand, but also enough to allow appropriate exposure for your subject.
Our next one is the bark at the moon.
In addition to being a great Ozzy Osbourne album, it is also my go-to for vertical shots. What you want to do when you go to a vertical shot is bring up the dangling strobe on the bottom and move it above the center line of the lens. In this shooting situation, usually one strobe is going to be closer to your subject than the other one. For the one that is closer to the subject, you'll need to turn the power down, and for the one that is further away, you're going to need to turn the power up.
Then our next one is maybe the most obscurely titled of the bunch with the 2112.
Yes, for those Rush fans out there, you'll know the reference to 2112. For the 99.9% of the rest of you, it's basically a horizontal version of the bark at the moon. This is used when the subject is closer to one side than the other. So for this one, I tend to take one strobe, put it over the top of the camera housing, and one strobe on the side. The one that's on the top is going to have to be turned down because it's usually closer to the subject. For the one on the side, it tends to be further away from the subject, so I have to turn the power up so it actually reaches the subject.
Our sixth position, and probably my favorite, the Princess Leia.
The Princess Leia is used for close focus wide angle photography where you need to get those strobes super in tight to the housing, just like those buns. You use this when subjects are only inches away from the dome. You must be really aware, however, to keep the strobes up and back behind the handles for this one, otherwise the strobes are going to show up in your image. And if that happens, not even the dark side of the Force is powerful enough to save your image.
Then we're on to the Titanic.
I'm flying. The Titanic position is used for extremely large objects underwater, like the Titanic. So think of shipwrecks, large reef scenes, anything that is at the absolute limit of what you're able to shoot underwater. So for this one, you want to get your strobes out as wide as possible, just like the arms of Rose on the bow of the Titanic. Again, you want to make sure the strobes are above the center line of the lens. That way you're not going to underlight your subject.
So those are some of our favorite strobe positions, and we hope you'll find them useful on your next dive. Jim, remind everybody what they need to know when they just want to know where the heck to put their strobes.
Well, first things first, you have to know what you want to light. If you don't know what you want to light, you'll never know where to put your strobes. So composition is everything. Think about where you're going to put elements in the frame and how you're going to light them. And if you ever get stuck and you're like, I don't know where to put my strobe, well, point it at the thing you want to light.
So thanks for watching, and remember, you can help us keep making more of these videos by purchasing your underwater camera equipment from us here at Backscatter. We dive, shoot, and service everything we sell, and every purchase from us does include free lifetime tech support.
And if you ever want to learn more about this subject or anything else, you can come with me on a trip and I'll teach you everything I know.
Can't ask for a better deal than that. I'm Robin from Backscatter signing off.
I'm Jim from Backscatter signing off.
And we'll see you next time.